Welcome back to the Vibrational Stage Podcast. Today we are stepping into a conversation that touches nearly every human being on some level, even if they do not yet have language for it. Control. Not obvious control, not controlling other people, not domination, but internal control, psychological control, emotional control. The quiet and often invisible attempt to create safety through prediction, preparation, monitoring, analysis, and mental management. And for many people, this process has become so normalized that they no longer even realize it is happening. The mind is always running, always calculating, always evaluating, always preparing for what might go wrong next. And eventually the person begins assuming, this is just who I am. But perhaps it's not who they are. Perhaps it is who they became while trying to survive uncertainty. And that distinction matters deeply, because many people are not broken. They are adapted. And adaptation is very different from defectiveness. Section 1. When safety becomes attached to control. One of the most important things to understand about the nervous system is this. It is not primarily designed to make us happy. It is designed to keep us safe. And when the nervous system experiences instability, unpredictability, emotional injury, abandonment, criticism, trauma, chaos, rejection, or prolonged stress, it begins searching for ways to reduce future pain. One of the most common adaptations is control, because control creates the illusion of predictability, and predictability temporarily reduces nervous system threat, so the system begins developing strategies. If I think ahead enough, can avoid pain. If I analyze everything, I can prevent mistakes. If I stay alert, I can catch danger before it happens. If I emotionally prepare for the worst case scenarios, I will suffer less later. And slowly, control begins masquerading as safety. But here is the difficult truth. The nervous system can become addicted to control patterns even when they are exhausting, because predictable exhaustion can feel emotionally safer than unpredictable peace. And that realization changes how we understand overthinking entirely. Section 2, hypervigilance, living in constant anticipation. Hypervigilance is one of the most misunderstood human experiences. People often think hypervigilance simply means anxiety, but it is deeper than that. Hypervigilance is the nervous system's attempt to stay ahead of danger through constant awareness. The problem is, eventually the system stops distinguishing between true danger and possible discomfort. Everything becomes emotionally loaded. A delayed text, a facial expression, a financial concern, a social interaction, a future uncertainty, a physical sensation, a mistake, silence, change. The nervous system begins interpreting uncertainty itself as a potential threat. And when that happens, the person stops living in the present moment. They begin living in anticipation, preparing emotionally for futures that have not happened. This is why many people feel exhausted even when nothing is wrong, because the body is carrying continuous low-grade survival activation. And over time, that reshapes identity itself. The person no longer experiences vigilance as something they do. It becomes who they believe they are. I am just an anxious person. I'm just a worrier. I'm just someone who thinks too much. But often, they are not witnessing personality. They are witnessing prolonged nervous system adaptation. Section 3. The hidden relationship between trauma and control. Trauma is not always what happened. Sometimes trauma is what the nervous system learned from what happened. And one of the most common lessons trauma teaches is this: the world is not emotionally safe. When that belief becomes deeply embedded, the nervous system begins trying to compensate. It becomes hyper-aware, hyper-prepared, hyper-analytical, hyper-responsible, because somewhere internally the system believes if I stay alert enough, I can prevent future suffering. And this can show up in many forms. Perfectionism, people-pleasing, emotional suppression, obsessive thinking, over-planning, difficulty resting, inability to relax, constant productivity, fear of uncertainty, compulsive self-monitoring, difficulty trusting others, difficulty trusting life itself. And perhaps one of the saddest parts of this is this. Many people receive praise for trauma responses. They are called responsible, reliable, productive, high-functioning, self-aware, strong. Meanwhile, internally, their nervous system is exhausted because surviving and relaxing are not the same thing. Functioning and feeling safe are not the same thing. Section 4. The emotional addiction to control. This is where the conversation becomes even deeper. Control is not only protective, it can also become emotionally addictive. Because control can temporarily reduce uncertainty, and uncertainty is uncomfortable for the nervous system. So the mind learns thinking equals safety, preparing equals safety, monitoring equals safety, analyzing equals safety, and eventually stillness itself begins feeling threatening. Because stillness removes the illusion of management. This is why many people struggle to rest. Not because they dislike peace, but because peace initially feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity can feel unsafe to a conditioned nervous system. So the mind fills the silence again. More thinking, more planning, more worrying, more scanning. And often the person does not realize they are not consciously choosing this. Their nervous system is trying to maintain emotional predictability. Section 5. The hidden grief beneath mental overactivity. Underneath chronic control patterns, there's often grief. Deep grief. Not always conscious grief, but accumulated grief. Grief for how long the nervous system has carried. Grief for how much life was spent bracing. Grief for how much beauty was missed while surviving internally. Grief for how exhausting it has been to constantly monitor everything. Grief for how alone it can feel inside a mind that never fully rests. And sometimes when people finally begin slowing down, emotion rises unexpectedly. Not because they are becoming worse, but because survival activation has been suppressing emotional processing. And when safety begins increasing, feelings begin returning. This is why healing is often emotional before it becomes peaceful. The nervous system finally stops running long enough to feel what it had been postponed. And that process deserves compassion, not judgment. Section 6. Surrender is not weakness. Surrender is one of the most misunderstood words in personal growth and healing. People hear surrender and imagine giving up, losing control, passivity, collapse, helplessness. But true surrender is not abandoning responsibility. It is releasing the belief that constant internal resistance creates safety. That is very different. Surrender is not saying nothing matters. Surrender is saying I no longer want to live in permanent war with reality. That shift changes everything because many people are not exhausted from life itself. They are exhausted from resisting uncertainty every moment of life. And the nervous system eventually reaches a threshold where constant control becomes unsustainable. At some point, the body quietly whispers, I can't keep carrying reality this way. Section 7. Relearning Trust. Healing often begins very gently, not through massive breakthroughs, not through becoming fearless overnight, but through tiny nervous system experiences that slowly teach this moment is survivable. I can soften without collapse. I can pause without losing everything. I can exist without monitoring every second. And little by little, trust begins returning. Not blind trust, embodied trust. The kind of trust that emerges through repeated lived experience, breath by breath, moment by moment, experience by experience. And perhaps this is what many people are truly seeking beneath all of the overthinking. Not certainty, but safety. Not total control, but enough trust to finally stop bracing against life. Closing reflection. Peace without control. Perhaps peace is not found by controlling every possibility. Perhaps peace begins when the nervous system slowly realizes uncertainty does not automatically equal danger. Perhaps peace is learning how to remain present without constantly preparing for collapse. Perhaps peace is allowing life to move without emotionally gripping every moment. And perhaps healing is not becoming someone entirely new. Perhaps healing is remembering who you were beneath survival adaptation. Thank you for being here with me today. And if this conversation resonated deeply with you, continue this journey over on the VibeShift blog, where we integrate this week's teachings, reflections, and deeper insights from across the entire VibeShift ecosystem. Continue reading here, the VibeShift blog. Until next time, keep softening, keep breathing, and keep remembering, you do not need to control every moment of life to slowly relearn how to trust being alive within it.